if you look in the last 10 years in the United States, it's pretty much flatlined.
Hi, once again, everybody. Welcome back to the Comstock channel. I'm Marlin Bohling with you. Happy Election Day. Well, I hope you took part and did your civic duty and went out and voted. If not already, that you will today, and make sure you get it done. No matter how you cast your vote, it's important that you do that. Today, on this very important day, I have with me the president of Comstock Investments, Matthew Kruse, for our weekly update on things related to South American production, because Matthew, the harvest here is just about done. And now the focus is almost entirely turning to Brazil and South America. So I wanted to get your take on what we're looking at, if you can. Can you explain how the planting progress is going on Brazilian soybeans?
Well, they're continuing to make strong progress, as we kind of suggested last week, that they might, if they did another 20% in the last week, they'd be caught up with the average. And that's pretty much exactly what's happened. Right now they're in kind of the upper 50%. I think we estimate about 58% as about right now complete. And so that brings them within their 3-year historical average. It's possible that they can, catch up to that. So it's been kind of a dramatic reversal where they started. They were a little bit delayed starting out, and now it looks like they're going to finish up on time or even ahead of schedule. So that's, roughly where they're at right now. I did speak with one grower in central Mato Grosso, that a large farm operation, about 50,000 acres, and they wrapped up about 10 days ago already. So they're already farmers in Mato Grosso that are getting done with planting. He said they could plant like 2,200 acres a day. And so, they got some of the larger operations are built to go fast, when you got that many acres. So I calculated that, Marlin, that they could plant my farm in about 4 hours. So,
Oh, man. Yeah, that's crazy. And of course, they have big acreages that they need to cover there, too. All right, so let's move on to some other things that are going to be applicable right now. And it's going to have to do with what the weather outlook is for that area. Here we have a map of Brazilian weather. Now, this particular forecast map is for next week. So explain what we're looking at. Contrary to what a lot of folks think, here your red would be the highest amounts of rain, right? The deepest red.
And in that gray area is where it's the heaviest, where you're going to see as much to 8 inches accumulated in the next week or so. Gets basically through mid-November. And so you can see it's just the rainfall's building in kind of the central primary growing regions, that we don't really see any drought issues at the moment, for the most part. Maybe in the south it's let up a little bit. There's parts there in Rio Grande do Sul and Paraná where it's maybe only an inch or two in here in the next week or so. But for the most part, we're seeing an abundance of rainfall, and we don't really see any weather issues. Kind of looking out into the future here, into December, kind of mid-December. It still kind of shows that there's, for the most part, above average rainfall. Maybe in those northeast areas that we talked about, it's a little bit below average. And so, but those, as we said before, that's kind of limited to maybe 10% of Brazil's overall production. So it's not a huge area. And it's still pretty early, I don't think we can say there's going to be any losses due to that or anything, but overall, yeah, it's, there's a lot of growing season to go yet, but they're off to a strong start. So all this rain has kind of made everyone want to plant quickly, and they are, and everything that's been planted early is getting enough moisture to kind of germinate and get a good start.
As I mentioned, it is election season, of course, or election day. And, one of the things that a lot of farmers have been waiting on is some of these regulations to come down so that they know what's going to be taking place on alternative fuel production. And some of that has to do with SAF fuel production. And here's a graphic that you had put together. Explain what we're looking at here when it comes to SAF ingredients and how the U.S. compares to Brazil.
I didn't put this together, but I pulled this off of Bloomberg. So I thought it was interesting that Bloomberg came with an article this week talking about how basically big oil was looking to invest heavily in Brazil because they thought Brazil was really set up perfectly or favorably to kind of meet the world's global SAF demands. And a couple of the reasons for that is, they're already set up to produce the ethanol on a massive scale between the sugar mills, and then there's a lot of investment being made into corn ethanol plants in Brazil. But maybe first and foremost, what they're pointing out was that the Brazilian sugar canes have a lower carbon footprint than um, than the U.S. corn ethanol does, by less than half as much. And that's what this image kind of shows, that Bloomberg was making this argument. And they're talking about how they think that currently that Brazil could produce as much as 13 billion gallons of SAF, and it could eventually grow beyond that. And the point being was that the United States is not competitive right now. We need clearance with that 45Z policy, and we really need those carbon pipelines to happen and to come through. Otherwise, we're not going to be competitive at all. We're going to lose our entire export ethanol market. But a lot of these companies they're looking. Brazil's excited about this. Their government realizes how big a deal this is. They're announcing every week massive investments to kind of facilitate this and basically make Brazil the number one or premier provider of SAF fuels, whereas here in the United States, nothing happens. Everything's gridlocked, and no one can agree on anything, and even farmers are all unsure, if they should be going along with the SAF with the carbon pipelines or not. And meanwhile, our competitors are making advancements on this, and they're going to benefit from it long term. So
we're waiting on the announcement. You call it the 45Z announcement, and a lot of folks think that's related to the farm bill, and because we don't have a farm bill, we're not getting that regulation. It doesn't even come from the farm bill, does it?
No, I think it's been the U.S. Treasury that is kind of odd, but the U.S. Treasury is supposed to be in charge of that. I guess they got delegated to them, which seems like the worst outfit in the government that you'd want to be put in charge of that.
It just seems so unnatural to me. But anyway, that's where it's coming from, and that is where apparently the holdup is for whatever reason. I don't know what's going on with that, but yeah, I'm glad you explained that. Okay, Matthew, if you don't mind, we did have a question from our audience that came in on social media here this last week, and I wanted to know if you could address this. All right, here it is. It came in, I believe, on our one of the Facebook discussion groups, and it was from Jamie Fackler. And he says, it would be interesting to know what the cost and availability of fertilizer is, and what does it take every year to grow a decent crop? And he's referring to Brazil's soils. He says, I've always heard distribution of fertilizer, the further away from the coast you get, is difficult to get due to lack of infrastructure like rail and river systems and that sort of thing. And I thought that was a very interesting perspective, and thank you, Jamie, for your question there. So I wanted to get your take on that. Do you have any thoughts on actually what makes up the availability and the cost of fertilizer there in Brazil?
Well, the cost of fertilizer, as a general statement, is pretty high. They're highly dependent on imports. The last number I saw, they're importing like 94% of their potash. It's maybe not quite as bad with like the phosphorus and nitrogen, but still, like the nitrogen, I think is 3/4 of it they're importing, and over half of their phosphorus they're importing. So they're highly dependent on imports. It's somewhat of a national security issue, I would say, for them, because if they can't get their fertilizer, they can't plant soybeans. And if they can't plant soybeans, Brazil comes to a halt. They can't pay their bills. And I always remember the story I tell is that when Russia invaded the Ukraine, and there's all this global turmoil when that happened, the Brazilian president was on a plane the next day going to Russia to meet with Vladimir Putin, because Russia and the Belarus region is Brazil's number one source for potash. And he was basically going to Putin to personally be reassured that, hey, you're gonna keep sending us our potash, aren't you? Because we're
That's
gonna be screwed if
interesting.
we don't get that, right? It's a big deal for them. They make all these announcements like, okay, we're going to start developing, our own um, fertilizer production and phosphate mining and all that. But like a lot of things, nothing ever happens. They make these announcements that they're going to build a railroad, and 10 years later, nothing happens. But, you can see in this chart here that they're consuming, 46 million metric tons of fertilizer overall. And how highly, and their dependency on the imports has only grown, and it's just commensurate with their growth. And I don't know that trend is going to change. If I'll never be president of Brazil, but if I was president of Brazil, this would be the first thing I do. I'd say, I don't know what it takes. If it takes $10 billion, but we're going to start producing more of our own fertilizer because they need it. Every year they need more, pretty much, but it's just something that doesn't change. And so the cost to the farmer is high. I think I looked up what kind of the average fertilizer cost to plant soybeans in Mato Grosso was, and it was around $120 an acre, which I think is pretty high. But it's hard to compare apples to apples, right? Because some people use more fertilizer than others, but there's been years I didn't put any fertilizer on my soybeans, in here in Iowa, just because the natural fertility has been a lot better, using manure and different things over the years, and but they can't make that. It's harder for them to do that just with the natural kind of low organic matter in their soils there, and so. But as a general statement, it's pretty high, and I don't think that's going to change. The other thing maybe to add to that is, in terms of dry fertilizer, they can pretty much get what they want. The availability isn't a problem. It's just the cost to it. They don't have as many options as we do. Here in Iowa, most of what I'm using is kind of liquid 32%. They don't have that in Brazil. It's pretty much just strict dry urea for the most part. Now maybe that's improved a little bit, but as a general statement, it's all dry fertilizer, that they're moving in bulk. And so, the anhydrous, all that, forget about it. They don't have any of that.
Do they do crop rotation there like we do here?
I think in Mato Grosso, that's what they're achieving in planting that second safrinha corn crop, is they get rotation out of that. And that's a big part of why they started doing it. But you still see a lot of soybeans on soybeans, and so maybe that you wouldn't see here in the United States.
So I've got another one here for you. Let's take a look at our acreages. And everybody's expecting increasing acreage in Brazil. And that is kind of a concern for everybody moving forward. Is it more so based on concern about soybean acreage or corn acreage there?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this last week. I just put this chart together showing the soybean acreage. I can have another chart for you about corn acres. It's pretty similar, but I think this in the soybean acres maybe shows the stark contrast a little bit more on what soybean acres has done. For the most part, you look at the last 25 years in the United States, and that red line, it's up a little bit, 20% or so. If you look in the last 10 years in the United States, it's pretty much flatlined. And, now this, to be honest with you, this is, might be outdated a little bit here in the most recent years, but it's probably going to go down next year. And so versus there's a pretty clear uptrend with Brazil and that blue line there, where they were at little over 113 million acres and probably last year, and now they're going to go to 117 million next year. And so I think I calculated it out to it once where it's somewhere around like 230% growth, I think, in that period of time, versus like 15% growth in the United States. And so it was around 17, 18 year when they overtook us, was the first time in terms of just acres. and they've never looked back since then.
Are they growing corn acreage at the same time, or has it kind of leveled off, do you think?
It's still grown, probably not quite as quickly of a pace, but as the soybeans have, but it is growing. It tends to follow the coattails of the soybean crop to a certain extent, and so they are shortening that gap between U.S. corn acres and Brazilian corn acres. But they're still pretty. We have a pretty large head start on them, I'd say, and it's going to take time for them to, if they ever catch up to us. But in my opinion, the writing is kind of on the wall. Eventually, it's going to happen. It might be 20 years from now, but if their rate of growth continues the way it has, it's just a matter of time, in my opinion.
Now, we always hear about the safrinha crop being the biggest corn crop down there. Give us an idea geographically in the country of Brazil, which is very large. I mean, it goes from the Amazon all the way down south, covers a very broad range of latitude there. But where would the safrinha crop mainly be grown?
It's primarily in that center west region, which center west is Mato Grosso do Sul, and Goiás. Those are kind of the three main production states, which Mato Grosso is the biggest one by far. So, I think in terms of corn production, Mato Grosso is 35, maybe even 40% of the overall corn production grown in Brazil. So it's the 800-pound gorilla and makes up the biggest difference. So
all right, well, interesting stuff. So here we are. We're at the 2024 election cycle. No matter who wins, there's going to be fallout, and of course, we have to deal with it. Next year, we'll have a new Congress and everything. The economy seems to be pretty tenuous right now, and whoever gets into office is going to have kind of a tough row to hoe here, because it looks like they're going to be handed an economy that's really teetering right now. What about the ag side?
Yeah, I don't know that agriculture was going to be a priority for no matter who becomes the president. There's obviously been a lot of talk about the trade tariffs, and Trump has probably been a little bit more confrontational in how he's talked about increasing those tariffs with China, which I don't think would be a good thing. As we've talked about in the Comstock report in the past, it's really us that ends up paying those tariffs to consumers here back at home. That doesn't mean that if Harris is president that all that goes away or gets better. The Democrats have actually kind of maintained the status quo from the first Trump presidency. And so, but I think kind of Trump has kind of insinuated that if he gets back into office, he's going to, take it from 0 to 100 real quick. He's going to increase those tariffs to, maybe 60% on China. And, if that's the case, they're not going to buy anything from us, I don't think anymore, and or at least accelerate that. Now, I'm of the opinion that long term, I think it's already headed in that direction now. That we're trying to wean ourselves off of each other's economies a little bit. It's hard to do. It doesn't happen all at once. We're trying to bring chip making back home, which is kind of a national security issue for us, where everything, your refrigerator, your car, it's all made with computer chips now. And so, and all that's being made in China or Taiwan, and we're trying to bring that back home to the United States. They're obviously dependent on their protein sources from the United States, and I think we're saying that they're actively trying to source alternative means, and Brazil is obviously the biggest source for that. So any tariff that we place on China is really just going to advance more exports for Brazilian soybeans. More than they're already doing with China. The one thing that I noticed, I read somewhere that they're trying to encourage Russia to begin producing more soybeans, which makes sense because they're allies and they border each other. And so it's always bothered me in the past when people would say, "Oh, China's screwed. They need our soybeans. There's nothing they can do about it." And well, maybe that's true today, but it's not necessarily true tomorrow. They can find other alternative means for protein sources, and that maybe weren't being done in the past that they hadn't considered. And so that's just one example that why not have your ally and neighbor start producing more soybeans for you, to the point that in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, they don't need to buy any more soybeans from us. And so I think that day is coming. Now, maybe that's not such a bad thing if we can develop our own consumption here domestically within the United States with more renewable diesel and things like that. I'd like that to happen no matter what. I wish it would it seems like we've got a little bit ahead of ourselves, where we're kind of telling our number one customer off before we have a replacement for that market. It'd be nice to develop the renewable diesel before we throw our number one export partner in the trash. But that's kind of where we're at right now. So,
have you heard anything from anybody in regard to any possibility of getting a farm bill done in a lame duck session?
I haven't. I probably don't have my finger on the pulse there. It just seems like everyone's just kind of waiting for the election to be over, and then they'll start fresh and go from there. So I think that's where we're at. That there's probably not much going to happen for the next few months.
Well, Matthew, it's great to talk with you again. Thanks for getting us updated on what's going on in South American soybean and corn production. I always appreciate it. And we'll talk again next week. Keep those questions coming. Folks, we really appreciate that. You can either comment below in the segment below this video. We're also on watching Grain Market Discussions forum on Facebook, where we get some questions on there too. So we have several avenues on social media. You can get in touch with us or contact us directly as well, and we'd be glad to respond. And also, don't forget, we also have premium content available as well. You can try it out for a month for just $1. Matthew Kruse with us, president of Comstock. That'll do it for this episode. Make sure you go out and vote if you haven't already. I appreciate that. And for producer Brianne Hendrickson, I'm Marlin Bohling. We'll catch you next time here on the Comstock channel. Futures trading involves risk. The risk of loss in trading futures and/or options is substantial, and each investor and/or trader must consider whether this is a suitable investment. Past performance is not indicative of future results.